The gate agent called final boarding, and Ethan Mercer was still crouching on the airport floor, one knee pressing into the cold tile, trying to get Lily's shoe back on her foot, before anyone noticed they were the last ones left at gate C14. Lily was not cooperating. She had decided, somewhere between the security line and the pretzel stand, that her left shoe was the enemy. She had pulled it off, thrown it 2 feet to her left, and was now standing on one sock and pointing at a pigeon that had somehow gotten inside the terminal. Lily, he kept his voice low and even. Shoe, now. Pigeon, she said, with the certainty of someone who had just discovered something the rest of the world had missed. I see the pigeon. Shoe first. She looked at him the way 7-year-olds look at adults who are simply not understanding the situation. Then she picked up the shoe and handed it to him like she was doing him a favor. He got it on. He grabbed the carry-on with one hand and her hand with the other, and they moved through the gate at a pace that was technically not running but was doing its best impression of it. The flight attendant at the door gave him the look, the one that said they had been waiting. He said thank you 3 times in the span of 4 seconds, and maneuvered them both down the jet bridge. Lily was still talking about the pigeon. Their seats were 3A and 3B. First class, because his assistant had booked it 3 months ago, back when the trip was supposed to be a family one. He did not think about that. He stopped thinking about things like that by filling every second with something else, and right now that something else was getting Lily's stuffed rabbit, a gray, floppy thing named Clover who was missing her right eye, safely into the overhead bin without dropping her. He got them settled. Lily pressed her face immediately against the window and began narrating the ground crew's movements in a low, serious voice, as though she were a nature documentary presenter and the baggage handlers were a particularly fascinating species. Ethan leaned back. He let out a breath. It was the first breath in what felt like several hours that did not require effort. And then the woman arrived. He heard her before he saw her. A single syllable, sharp, clipped, addressed to the flight attendant in the aisle behind him. Not a question. An assessment. The kind of voice that had learned very early that confidence and volume were interchangeable and had been using them that way ever since. She appeared at his row. Diana Ashford was the sort of person who occupied space in a way that made you aware of your own posture. She was in her mid-40s, wearing a charcoal coat that had been cut for her specifically, carrying a slim leather bag that had never seen the inside of an overhead bin. She looked at seat 3C, and she looked at Lily, and she looked at the cracker crumbs that had materialized on the shared armrest in the 45 seconds since they had sat down. She looked at Ethan. He looked back at her. He was not going to apologize for existing. She turned to the flight attendant who had followed her down the aisle. Is there another seat available in first class? She asked, not loudly. She did not need to be loud. The sentence carried its own weight. The flight attendant, a young woman named Kara, whose name tag Ethan had already read because he tended to read name tags, said she would check. She disappeared. Diana remained standing, not sitting down, as if sitting down would indicate acceptance of a situation she had not yet agreed to. Lily noticed her. Lily noticed everything. Hi, Lily said. Diana did not respond. Lily turned this over for a moment, decided it was not her problem, and went back to the window. Ethan was watching the back of Kara's head as she consulted something at the front galley. He already knew the answer. He had seen the full flight notification in his email that morning. There was no other seat. There had not been one for 2 weeks. Kara came back. She was very professional about it. She explained that the flight was completely full. She said she was sorry. She offered Diana a pre-departure beverage as though that were a reasonable consolation for the presence of a 7-year-old. Diana's expression did not change in any way that could be described precisely, but something shifted behind it. She sat down. She placed her bag under the seat in front of her with the controlled movements of someone choosing, consciously, to perform calm. She did not look at Ethan again. Ethan looked straight ahead. Lily had Clover now tucked under her arm, and she was pressing the rabbit's remaining eye against the window so Clover could see out too. She narrated this to Ethan in a whisper. Clover likes the trucks, she said. That one's her favorite, the orange one. Tell Clover it's a fuel truck, he said. Lily took this information with gravity and relayed it to the rabbit. From his left, Ethan felt Diana shift in her seat. A small, precise movement. The kind of movement that was not quite a flinch, but was something related to it. He understood the feeling, even if he would never say so. He had been on the other side of moments like this. Once, years ago, before his entire understanding of what a person could carry had been revised completely. He was not angry. He was tired. He had been tired for 6 months and 4 days. He knew the exact number because he had been counting without meaning to, the way you count stairs in the dark without deciding to. Your body just does it, because somewhere inside you believe that if you know how many there are, you will not fall. The plane began to move. Lily watched the ground crew below with bright, focused eyes, her nose leaving a small fog patch on the glass. She did not ask where they were going. She had stopped asking questions that required answers about the future, which Ethan found both heartbreaking and, in a strange way, wise. She had found her own method of living inside whatever the present moment offered. He was still learning hers. He looked at his watch, then at the back of the headrest in front of him, then at his hands. His phone buzzed once with an email from Owen, his director of strategy. Subject line, pre-read attached for Tuesday. He turned the screen face down without opening it. Diana was already working. She had her laptop open, a document filling the screen, a stylus in her right hand. She read and made notes in the margins with movements that were sharp and decisive, the handwriting of someone whose thoughts arrived in complete sentences. She did not use a coffee cup holder. She held her coffee in her left hand while she worked, and she had not spilled a single drop, and they had hit a patch of bumpy air twice. Ethan watched her for exactly 3 seconds before he stopped watching her, because watching a stranger was not something he did. He pulled out the novel he had been carrying for 11 weeks and had read 30 pages of. He found his page. He read the same paragraph 4 times and remembered none of it. The clouds outside were thick and pale, moving like something deliberate. Lily had grown quiet in the way she grew quiet when she was getting sleepy, not all at once but in stages, her commentary slowing, her movements going softer, her body gradually leaning without her permission in the direction of the nearest warm thing, which happened to be him. He shifted to give her more room. "She can use the armrest," Kara said quietly from the aisle, pausing as she passed with a tray. She was talking to him, but she glanced at Diana when she said it, and Diana's jaw moved in a small, private way. "She's fine," Ethan said. "Thank you, Kara." Kara moved on. The armrest stayed up. Diana kept her elbow off it anyway. Ethan's book rested open in his lap. He was not reading it. He was thinking about the meeting on Tuesday, and about the hotel with its 1 king bed that he had asked to change to 2 queens, and about whether Lily would eat the breakfast at the restaurant, or whether she would do the thing where she ate only the orange from the fruit cup and declared herself full. He was thinking about the fact that the last time he had been on a plane, Claire had been sitting next to him, and she had fallen asleep with her head on his shoulder before they reached cruising altitude, and he had stayed perfectly still for 2 hours with his neck in an uncomfortable position because he had not wanted to wake her. He closed the book. The plane climbed higher and the clouds closed under them and the cabin light went soft and golden and Lily's head found his shoulder, the same shoulder, and she was asleep in the way children fall asleep, completely, instantly, without warning. He stayed perfectly still. Diana looked up once from her screen. He did not see it, but she saw him, and she looked back at her screen, and she set down her stylus, and she did not pick it up again for a while. Somewhere over the middle of the country, with the cabin dimmed and most of the first-class passengers either asleep or absorbed in their own worlds, the quiet between Ethan and Diana became a different kind of quiet, not the sharp, deliberate silence of the first hour. Something more like a ceasefire, neither of them actively reinforcing the distance between them, both of them simply existing in proximity, managing it. Lily's feet had migrated across the invisible boundary of the seat divider. One small foot, the one in the shoe that had started the morning as an enemy, was resting lightly against Diana's seat cushion, not touching her, but very close, close enough that Diana had rearranged her own legs twice to keep the contact from happening. Ethan had noticed. He had not moved Lily because moving Lily would wake Lily, and a sleeping Lily was the only version of the morning that had gone well so far. He decided he would accept whatever happened next as a consequence of that choice. What happened next was that Diana looked down at the small foot for a long moment, 3 full seconds, which is actually quite long when you count it. And then she looked out her window, and she said nothing, and she did not move away. It was not softening. He would not have called it that. It was more like someone who had been standing very rigid for a very long time choosing, for just a moment, to stop. He looked back at his book. He read 2 more paragraphs and remembered one of them. The seatbelt sign came on. The captain's voice filled the cabin with the calm, practiced cadence of someone who had delivered this same announcement many hundreds of times and had learned to make routine sound like reassurance. Light turbulence ahead. Please return to your seats. Lily did not wake up. The turbulence came in 3 quick rolls, the kind that tipped your drink and made people grip their armrests. Ethan had one hand under Lily's head to keep it from bumping the window. With his other hand, he held the seat back. He was calm. He had flown enough in the years when he was building things to have made a kind of peace with the uncertainty of altitude. And then Lily's hand shot out. It was reflex, that deep, animal reflex in children, where fear reaches before they are even fully awake. Her small hand grabbed the nearest thing. The nearest thing was Diana's hand. The cabin rocked once more and then steadied. Lily's eyes opened. She looked around, located Ethan, determined that everything was acceptable, and closed them again. Her hand did not let go. Ethan watched Diana's face in the pale cabin light. She was looking at Lily's hand wrapped around 2 of her fingers. Her expression was doing something complicated, something that moved through several rooms very quickly before it landed somewhere unreadable. She did not pull her hand back. She did not squeeze Lily's hand either. She simply held still. Lily's grip loosened as she fell back into sleep, and her hand dropped back into her own lap, and the whole thing lasted perhaps 30 seconds, and was witnessed by no one except Ethan, who looked away before Diana could realize he had seen it. The turbulence was gone. The seatbelt sign clicked off. Diana picked up her stylus and went back to her document. Her handwriting looked exactly the same as before. Sharp, certain, arriving in complete sentences. Ethan went back to his book. They did not speak. They did not need to. The flight had another 90 minutes, and they would spend all of it in their shared silence. 2 people in expensive seats at 35,000 feet, carrying things the other person could not see and would never ask about. That was fine. That was how it was supposed to work. Except that Ethan Mercer was the majority silent owner of the company Diana Ashford had given the last 7 years of her life to building, and in 4 days, on a Tuesday morning, in a room where she believed she was one of the most powerful people present, she would learn that the tired man in seat 3A had been the quiet center of that power all along. But that was Tuesday. Right now, he turned a page he had not actually read and watched the cloud line out Lily's window, and somewhere in the quiet beside him, Diana Ashford closed her laptop and sat in the dark with her thoughts for the first time in a very long while. The hotel was a 20-minute drive from the airport, and Lily slept through all of it, her head against the car window, one hand still loosely holding Clover the rabbit, the other curled under her chin. Ethan watched the city come into view through the opposite window. Gray stone buildings, a river catching the late afternoon light, the particular shade of sky that meant the temperature was dropping. He had been to this city 8 times, always for work, always fast, arrive, meet, decide, leave. He had never once eaten at a restaurant that was not within walking distance of the hotel. This time he had packed crayons. The hotel check-in took longer than expected because there had been a system error, and his reservation was showing the wrong room type. He stood at the front desk for 11 minutes while the manager, a man named Patrick whose tie was slightly too tight, worked through the problem with a focused, apologetic efficiency. Lily sat on a bench nearby and drew a picture of Clover in the small notebook she carried everywhere. She had been doing this for months, filling notebooks with drawings of Clover in different situations. Clover at the grocery store, Clover driving a bus, Clover on the moon. She showed him the current drawing when they were finally in the elevator. Clover was sitting in what appeared to be a throne, wearing a crown. "Queen Clover," Lily said. "She earned it," Ethan said. The room had 2 beds as requested. Lily chose the one by the window without discussion, and immediately placed Clover on the pillow with the ceremony of someone settling a dignitary into their quarters. Ethan set the carry-on down and stood in the center of the room and thought about nothing for exactly 3 seconds, which was his limit, before he pulled out his phone and checked his messages. 14 emails, 2 texts from Owen, 1 missed call from his mother-in-law, Gail, whose name on his screen still made something shift in his chest, in a way he could not entirely name, partly love, partly grief, partly the guilt of a man who knew she was suffering too, and did not always have the energy to carry her through it, at the same time as carrying himself. He called her back. She picked up on the second ring. "You made it," she said, and her voice was the particular warmth of someone who had been worrying since the moment you left. "We made it," he said. "Lily's fine. She's making Clover into a queen." He heard Gail laugh. It was a real laugh, not the kind she deployed at appropriate moments, the actual kind, the one that sounded like it surprised her. He had been collecting those laughs since Claire's funeral, like a man picking up pieces of something that used to be whole, carrying each one carefully. "She would," Gail said. "That rabbit outranks all of us." "She does." They talked for 12 minutes, not about anything that mattered, in the way that conversations between people who have already lived through the thing that matters most tend to operate, circling the grief without landing on it, staying warm and close around its edges. He heard the television in Gail's background. He did not ask about her week. She did not ask about his feelings. They had an understanding, him and Gail. They each kept the other functional. That was the deal. When he hung up, Lily had fallen asleep again. 7-year-olds, he had discovered, could sleep with a thoroughness that was almost architectural. She was horizontal within 30 seconds of lying down, Clover tucked into the crook of her elbow, one sock half off her foot. He covered her with the blanket without waking her, and ordered room service for himself, and sat in the chair by the window, and ate a sandwich, and looked out at the city, and felt the day settle into his bones. Tuesday was 3 days away. He had been preparing for Tuesday for 6 weeks. The quarterly strategy meeting at Caldwell Group, the company he had quietly held a majority stake in for 3 years, since the early investment had grown beyond anyone's early expectations, including his own. He had never attended a meeting in person. He communicated through Owen, who communicated through the board's liaison, who communicated with the executive team. It was a structure that had worked because Ethan had built it to work without him. He was good at building things that worked without him. He was less good at the other kind. But Owen had told him, 3 months ago, that things were shifting. The company was at a crossroads, a new market expansion proposal that the executive team was divided on, a personnel restructuring that he needed to either approve or halt, and a quarterly result that looked fine on the surface and had a problem underneath it. The kind of problem that needed someone who could look at the full picture. The kind of problem that needed him in the room. He had agreed. He had booked the trip. And then he had called Gail and asked if she could watch Lily for a week, and Gail had said yes immediately. And then he had called Lily's school and arranged the missed days. And then he had sat in the driveway in his car for a while, not going inside yet. He had brought Lily instead. He had not planned it. He had been standing in his kitchen at 6 in the morning, 3 days before the flight, looking at a house that was clean and quiet and full of his wife's books, and the idea of leaving Lily in it, even with Gail, who loved her as completely as a person can love, had felt like something he was not yet capable of. So he had packed the crayons and the notebooks and Clover, and he had called the hotel and changed the room, and that was that. He finished the sandwich. He put the plate outside the door. He got into the other bed and lay in the dark with his eyes open and listened to Lily breathe. He was not thinking about Diana Ashford. He had genuinely not thought about her since the car from the airport. The incident on the plane had already been filed into the category of things that were unpleasant and irrelevant, a category that, over the past 6 months, had expanded considerably to accommodate whatever the world chose to put into it. He was not the kind of man who held things. He had learned that from his father, George Mercer, who had been a civil engineer and a quiet person, and the kind of father who fixed things without announcing that he had fixed them. George had died when Ethan was 26, before any of the success, before Claire, before Lily, and Ethan had carried that timing like a stone in his pocket ever since. He had wanted his father to see what he had built. That wanting never fully went away. He thought about the meeting on Tuesday instead. He thought about Owen's assessment of Diana Ashford. Owen had described her in a single sentence. She is the reason the operations side still works. And Owen was not given to praise. Ethan had reviewed her record. 7 years at Caldwell Group. Promoted twice. The kind of track record that was entirely consistent and entirely invisible, which meant she was good at her job, and not good at making people remember she was good at her job, which were two very different skills, and most people only had one. He had reviewed her record without any face to attach it to. Now he had a face. He closed his eyes. He was asleep within 6 minutes. He slept for 4.5 hours, which was more than he had slept in a single stretch in recent memory, and he woke to Lily standing next to his bed in the dark, holding Clover. "I'm hungry," she said. "What time is it?" He looked at the digital clock. It was just past midnight. "I'm hungry," she said again, with the patience of someone who had identified the relevant information and was waiting for the other party to catch up. He got up. He ordered a grilled cheese from the late-night menu, because every hotel had something close enough to a grilled cheese on the late-night menu, and they sat on his bed together under the single lamp while they waited for it to arrive. Lily drew a picture of the lamp. He looked at his email and closed it again. When the food came, she ate 2/3 of it and gave the rest to Clover symbolically. He drank the tea that came with it, which he had not ordered but was grateful for. "Dad," she said. "Yeah? That lady on the plane." He looked at her. "What about her?" She considered this carefully. "She looked like she forgot how to be nice," she said. "Like she knew how to once, and then she forgot." He thought about that for a while. "Maybe," he said. "Do you think she'll remember?" Lily asked. "I don't know," he said honestly. Lily appeared to find this acceptable. She picked up Clover and lay back down on her own bed and was asleep again in the time it took him to clear the room service tray. He stood in the middle of the room in the dark and thought about what a 7-year-old who had been through a harder thing than anyone her age should face had just said about a stranger. Then he went to the window and looked at the city for a long time. He was not a man given to premonitions. He did not believe in signs. He was a builder by instinct and an investor by profession, and both of those things rewarded only what could be measured. But standing there at the window at 12:40 in the morning, with the city laid out below him in its ordinary nighttime quiet, he had a feeling, not a dramatic feeling, not the movie kind, just a small, ordinary certainty. That Tuesday was going to change something. He could not have said what. He went back to bed. He lay in the dark. He listened to Lily breathe. Outside, the city went on being itself. Traffic lights cycling through their colors for empty intersections, the river moving under its bridges, the night doing what the night does, which is simply persist until it becomes something else. 4 days earlier, at gate C14, a woman had refused to sit next to him. 4 days from now, she would walk into a boardroom and discover what she had been sitting next to all along. The story was already in motion. It had been in motion since before either of them had stepped onto that plane. It had been in motion since the first investor agreement was signed 3 years ago, since a meeting in a conference room in this same city where a young company's leadership team had presented their vision to a group of people in suits, and one of those people in suits had been Ethan Mercer, who had asked 2 questions and said almost nothing else, and had written a check 3 weeks later that nobody on the Caldwell Group executive team had ever connected to a face. He had preferred it that way. Until Tuesday. He closed his eyes. This time he did not count. Diana Ashford did not sleep well in hotels. She never had. It was something about the particular silence of a room that was not hers, a silence that had no history in it, no sounds she had learned to sleep through. She lay in her room on the 14th floor of a different hotel, 8 blocks away from Ethan Mercer, and stared at the ceiling and thought about the Nairobi expansion proposal, which was the problem she was supposed to solve by Tuesday. She had been trying to solve it for 6 weeks. The proposal had come from her own team, a careful, well-researched plan for entering a new market that would double the company's geographic footprint in 18 months. The numbers were good. The strategy was sound. She believed in it completely, the way you believe in something you watched be built from the beginning. The board's liaison, a careful man named Philip, had sent back 3 rounds of revisions. Each round added requirements. Each round moved the approval window back. After the 3rd revision, Diana had sat in her office for a long time trying to understand who, exactly, was asking for these revisions and why, because Philip had the authority of a post office and the instincts of one too. He did not generate this kind of sustained, precise pushback on his own. Someone above him was involved. Someone she had never met. She had asked. Philip had been evasive in the specific way that meant he had been told to be evasive. She had gone around him to 2 members of the board and gotten polite, careful conversations that confirmed nothing and told her everything. There was a stakeholder they were being protective of, a stakeholder who was paying very close attention. She had pulled the investor records 3 weeks ago. It had taken her 2 days and a conversation with a contact in the legal department to find what she was looking for. There it was, a holding entity, 3 layers deep, connected to a name she did not recognize, Mercer Capital. She had searched the name. Very little came up. A small digital footprint, deliberately so. the kind of digital absence that costs money and intention to maintain. A man who did not want to be found, a man who had invested more in Caldwell Group than anyone on the executive team, and had done so in a way that kept his name off every public document. She had known there was a silent majority stakeholder. Everyone on the senior team knew in the abstract. They had simply never tried to find out who it was, because in 7 years, he had never interfered. The company had run exactly as it had always run. The board had functioned as it always had, and whoever Mercer Capital was had remained precisely and entirely silent. Until the Nairobi revisions. She had written 3 pages of notes about what this shift meant. She had built a profile of the kind of person who would invest this way, hold this long, and then begin pushing back on a specific proposal. She had a picture in her mind, precise, strategic, someone who had seen something in her numbers that she had not, or who had an objection they had not been willing to state directly. She was not afraid of them. She was prepared for them. She fell asleep somewhere after 2 in the morning, still running through the presentation she was going to deliver on Tuesday, still certain in the way competent people are certain, the way certainty feels before the thing you did not know arrives and rearranges everything. She was prepared for a sophisticated adversary. She was not prepared for the man from seat 3A. Those are different kinds of unpreparedness, and only one of them can be remedied with a 70-slide presentation deck. Monday passed the way Mondays pass before Big Tuesdays. Fast, full of the wrong things. Diana had 2 prep calls, a conversation with her deputy that clarified nothing, a very good salad at noon that she ate standing up in her hotel room, and an evening walk along the river that she took because her doctor had said she needed to move more, and because she had run out of useful things to do, and doing useless things felt better when they involved movement. The city was beautiful in the early evening. She did not particularly notice. She noticed the river because she was thinking about flow rates and market penetration timelines, and the particular way that opportunity moved if you were not positioned correctly to receive it. She passed a family near one of the bridges, a man, crouching down to show a small girl something in the water, a duck, or a fish, or simply the way light moved on a moving surface. The girl was excited. The man was patient. He was wearing a gray jacket that had seen better days. Diana walked past them without stopping. She was back in the hotel by 7. She ordered dinner and reviewed the final version of her deck until 11, and went to bed and lay in the specific hotel silence that had no history in it. She thought she was ready. She was ready for every version of Tuesday that she had been able to imagine. Tuesday was going to produce a version she had not. She always set 2 alarms on mornings that mattered. The first at 6, the second at 6:15. The second being mostly symbolic, a fail-safe she never needed but kept out of some deep-wired refusal to leave important mornings to chance. Both alarms went off. She was already awake for both of them. She dressed in the dark. She made the coffee the hotel provided, which was not good, and drank it anyway, because some routines were not about pleasure. She stood at the window with the cup in both hands and looked at the city below, where the morning was arriving in the gray, ordinary way of cities that do not care about your Tuesday. She was ready. 73 slides, 6 weeks of work, 7 years of context. A proposal that was right, that she knew was right, and that she was prepared to defend until the person in that room who had been quietly and persistently pushing back on it either agreed or gave her a reason she could actually work with. She picked up her bag. She took the elevator down. She walked out into the morning air, which was cold and clean and smelled like rain that had not arrived yet. 8 blocks away, in a room with 2 beds and a window that caught the early light, Ethan Mercer was already dressed and watching his daughter eat a croissant with the focused enjoyment of someone who had recently decided that croissants were worth taking seriously. He had arranged for a hotel babysitter, a cheerful woman named Donna who had arrived at 8 with a bag of art supplies and the particular energy of someone who genuinely liked 7-year-olds. Lily had assessed her in approximately 4 seconds and declared her acceptable by beginning a conversation about birds. Ethan buttoned his jacket. He looked in the mirror once, briefly, the way he looked in mirrors, checking not for vanity, but for anything that needed to be corrected. There was nothing. He was not a man who tried to look like something he was not. The gray at his temples had arrived 2 years ago and stayed. The tiredness under his eyes was permanent, or close enough to it that the difference did not matter. He looked like himself. He kissed Lily on the top of the head. "Be back for lunch," he said. Donna knows about birds, Lily reported, without looking up from the croissant. Good, he said. He walked out of the hotel and into the morning. The Caldwell Group's city office occupied the top 3 floors of a glass building that reflected the sky so cleanly you could never tell, from the outside, whether the lights inside were on. Diana had been in this building 47 times. She knew where the good coffee was, not the machine in the executive kitchen, but the cart on the 2nd floor that opened at 7:30. She knew which elevator was slowest. She knew the security guard at the main desk was named Frank, that he had a daughter in college, and that if you asked him how she was doing, he would be happy to tell you about it for 3 minutes, which was the exact right amount of time. She asked. He told her. She went up. The boardroom was on the top floor. It had floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides and a long table that seated 18, and a view of the river that she had never once stopped to appreciate because there was always something on the table that needed her attention more. She arrived at 8:50, 10 minutes before the meeting was scheduled, because she always arrived 10 minutes before meetings were scheduled. She set her bag down in her usual chair, second from the left, at the side of the table that faced the windows, which meant she could see everyone across from her clearly, and they had to look slightly into the light to see her. She had chosen this seat on her first meeting here, 7 years ago, and she had sat in it every time since. She opened her laptop. She pulled up the final version of the deck. People began arriving. Owen Greer, the director of strategy, a lean, precise man who always looked like he was about to say something important and usually was, came in first, said good morning, and sat across from her with a folder he kept closed. Philip from the board liaison office came in next, looking, as he always did, slightly as though he had just been told something unexpected and had not yet processed it. 2 members of the legal team, the chief financial officer Russell, who was a tall man who laughed easily and whose laughter Diana had learned to read accurately. Real laughter meant he was comfortable. Too quick laughter meant something was being navigated. He was laughing at something Owen said as he came through the door. The real kind. She noted it without assigning it meaning. By 9:05, 9 people were seated, and the room was doing the pre-meeting thing that rooms do. The low murmur, the coffee cups, the open laptops, the side conversations that were really just ways of managing the energy before something official began. The chair at the head of the table was empty. Diana had never thought much about this. The head chair at Caldwell Group quarterly strategy meetings was always occupied by the board's appointed chair, a man named Gerald who was 70 years old, had white hair, and said things like, "Let's not overthink this," in moments that required a great deal of thinking. Gerald was fine. She worked around him the way you work around weather, not against it, simply aware of its patterns. Gerald was not here yet. And then the door opened. She was looking at her laptop screen when it happened, so she registered the sound first, the particular sound of the room changing when someone important entered it, which is not actually a sound but a shift in the quality of the silence, a slight adjustment in the angle of everyone's attention that you feel before you hear or see it. She looked up. Ethan Mercer walked to the head of the table. She did not understand what she was seeing. Her brain did what brains do when they receive information that contradicts everything they have assembled. It stalled. For 3 full seconds she looked at him and did not connect the man she was looking at to any coherent story. He was wearing a dark jacket, his hair was the same, the gray at his temples, the particular quality of his stillness, the way he occupied space without announcing himself. He set down a single notepad. He looked at the room. He saw her. His expression did not change, not a flicker. Not the smallest acknowledgement. He looked at the room the way he had looked out the airplane window, taking in information, filing it, giving nothing back. Owen spoke first. "Good morning, everyone. We'll get started. For those who haven't had the chance to meet him in person, this is Ethan Mercer, majority stakeholder at Mercer Capital and principal investor in Caldwell Group for the past 3 years. He'll be leading today's session." The room responded the way rooms respond to this kind of announcement, nodding, murmuring, the sound of people realigning. Russell said good morning with genuine warmth. Philip straightened his folder. The 2 legal team members exchanged a glance that said nothing except that this was not news to them. Diana sat completely still. She was looking at the notepad he had set down. It was an ordinary notepad, yellow, spiral-bound, the kind you find in hotel rooms or buy in a drugstore without thinking about it. He had written 3 things at the top of the first page, in a handwriting she could not read from where she was sitting. 3 years. She had been at this company for 7 years, and the most significant person in its ownership structure had been in that ownership structure for 3 of them, and she had never known his name, never seen his face. She had built the profile. She had found Mercer Capital. She had spent 6 weeks preparing to engage with an adversary she had defined in her mind as sophisticated, data-driven, and deliberately hidden. All of that was true. She had been correct about all of it. She had simply not known that the adversary had been sitting in seat 3A. Ethan opened the meeting. He spoke the way she might have expected him to speak, if she had known anything useful about him in advance, not with the performed authority of someone reminding the room of their position, but with the quiet, functional directness of someone who did not need reminding. He said that he had reviewed the quarter, that he had some observations, and that he wanted to hear the Nairobi presentation in full before the discussion. He looked at Diana. "Ms. Ashford," he said, and his voice was the same voice that had said, "Tell Clover it's a fuel truck," to a 7-year-old in seat 3A, and she had to push that image away immediately, because it was not useful right now. "Whenever you're ready." She was ready. She was always ready. She stood up. She went to the front of the room. She pulled up slide 1, and she delivered the best presentation of her professional career, not despite knowing who was watching, but because of it. Because she had spent 6 weeks preparing to face someone who saw things other people missed, and she had, it turned out, prepared correctly. Every number was exactly where it should be. Every objection she had anticipated was addressed before it was raised. She did not oversell, and she did not undersell, and she did not once use the word exciting to describe a market opportunity, which was a word she had banned from her vocabulary 3 years ago, on the grounds that if something actually was exciting, the numbers would say so. 41 minutes. She sat down. The room was quiet for a moment. Ethan looked at his notepad. He had written something on the second line during her presentation. She could not see what it was. "The projection on page 38, he said. "The 18-month timeline. You're holding it conservative." It was not a question. "Yes," she said. "Why?" "Because the infrastructure timeline in the target region has historically run 12 to 15% over the public estimates. If we build to the published infrastructure schedule, we are exposed. If we build to the adjusted schedule, we have a 3-month buffer." He wrote something. "Where does the 12 to 15% figure come from?" 12 years of project completion data from comparable markets. "I can send the source document." "Please do." He asked 4 more questions. Each one was the kind of question that only came from having read everything carefully and identified the single thing that was load-bearing in each argument. She answered all 4 of them without notes. When they were done, he looked at the rest of the room. He asked if there were other questions. There were a few. Good ones from Owen, a procedural one from Philip that was not particularly useful. She answered them. Then Ethan said, "The proposal is sound. I want 2 adjustments to the risk mitigation section, which Owen will detail. Subject to those changes, I'm prepared to approve." The room made the sound rooms make when a thing that has been in tension for a long time resolves. She heard it. She sat with it. 6 weeks of revisions, 3 rounds of pushback. The meeting she had been building toward for a month and a half. Over in 4 minutes, once he was in the room. She felt, all at once, several things. Relief, which was clean. Vindication, which was also clean. And underneath both of those, something more complicated that she could not name precisely. Something that had to do with the gap between the adversary she had built in her mind and the reality of the person sitting at the head of the table with a spiral notepad and a 3-day-old jacket. The meeting continued. Other agenda items. She participated. She was good at this, at staying present even when her mind was doing something else entirely, at running the surface level of a conversation while something below it processed independently. Below it, she was doing arithmetic. Seat 3A to head chair. The woman who had called the flight attendant, who had sat in deliberate distance, who had organized her legs to avoid a sleeping child's feet, the hand that Lily had grabbed in the turbulence. She pressed that thought down and moved on. At 11:15, Ethan called the meeting to a close. He thanked the room. People began gathering their things, the easy movement of a successful meeting ending, the particular relief of people who had expected difficulty and found resolution instead. Diana was packing her laptop. She was not looking at him. She was not avoiding looking at him. She was doing the thing she was always doing, which was moving to the next thing efficiently. She felt him stop beside her before she heard him. "The Nairobi infrastructure data," he said. She looked up. "Send it to Owen. He'll get it to me by end of day." A pause. It was thorough work. She held his gaze for 1 second. 2, 3. She was looking for something in his face. Recognition of the plane. Acknowledgement. A flicker of anything that would give her solid ground. There was nothing. He was either the most controlled person she had ever met, or the incident on the plane had not registered to him at all, had already been filed in that category she had noticed on the plane, the category of things that were unpleasant and irrelevant. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once and moved to speak with Russell. She put her laptop in her bag. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She stood in the hallway outside the boardroom and waited, and listened to the sound of a meeting that had gone well, and a career that was intact. And she tried to account for the feeling that was moving through her, which was not quite guilt and not quite shame, and was something in the neighborhood of both. On the flight, she had looked at the empty seat and seen an inconvenience, a tired man, an energetic child, cracker crumbs. She had performed a calculation so fast she had not even noticed she was doing it, and the result of the calculation was, "This is beneath me." She had been wrong about what was beneath her. The elevator opened. She got in. The doors closed. She rode down in the quiet, looking at her own reflection in the polished metal of the elevator doors, and she thought about a 7-year-old who had looked at her on a plane and said quite simply, "Hi." She did not go back to the hotel immediately. She walked instead, down to the river, which she had passed every morning and evening of this trip without looking at. She looked at it now. It was wide and gray, and moving with the particular indifference of water that has somewhere to be, and will not be hurried. She found a bench. She sat on it in her good coat and her presentation shoes and her laptop bag across her lap, and she sat there in a way she almost never sat anywhere, without an agenda. Her phone buzzed 3 times. She looked at it once, set it face down on her knee. She thought about the years she had given to Caldwell Group, which was a genuine number, not a performance of loyalty. 7 years was long enough to know a building by its elevator sounds, to know a city by the particular color of its sky in November, to have opinions about which conference rooms had bad acoustics, and which caterer the office used for the good meetings versus the ordinary ones. She had given that place her best thinking, her longest hours, and the particular focused care of someone who had found the work genuinely worth caring about. She had done all of that, and Ethan Mercer had watched it from a distance for 3 years, and he had just approved her 6-week project in 4 minutes, and she did not know how to feel about any of it. She knew how to feel about the work. The work was right. She had known the work was right. It was the other thing she was sitting with. She had been asked, in her professional life, to do many difficult things. Restructure teams in ways that cost people jobs. Deliver results in quarters that were not going to deliver results. Make decisions with incomplete information, and defend them to people who had the luxury of hindsight. She had done all of those things, and had done them, she believed, with a consistent honesty about what she was choosing and why. She was not sure she had ever been as honest with herself as a 7-year-old had been about her in 30 seconds. The river moved. A boat passed in the middle distance, small and steady. She thought about the morning on the plane with a clarity she had not allowed herself while it was happening. She had walked onto that plane with the particular armor of someone who had learned that the best way to control a morning was to control everything you could, and she had seen an obstacle, not a man, not a child, but an obstacle in the form of disruption and crumbs and the specific noise that children make when they are being children, and she had treated it with the full weight of her displeasure. She had never asked herself whether the man had a reason for looking the way he looked. She had never considered it. She was considering it now. The gray at his temples, the way the tiredness sat in him, not like something that had arrived recently, but like something that had moved in and put down furniture. The novel he had carried and barely read, the way he had ordered room service for himself and eaten it standing up, she had not seen that, could not have seen that, but she was building him now with the information she had. The same way she built market profiles and risk assessments, and what she was building did not look like an inconvenience. She got up from the bench. She walked back along the river toward the hotel. Halfway there, she stopped. She had been preparing for Tuesday for 6 weeks because she had identified an adversary. She had spent those 6 weeks building, in her mind, someone who was opposed to her work, and she had used that opposition to sharpen her presentation to its cleanest possible form. She had done it out of determination and perhaps stubbornness, which were two qualities that lived very close together in her, but she had done good work because of it. She thought about what Ethan Mercer had actually asked her in that room, not the questions of someone who was opposed, the questions of someone who was paying very close attention. The infrastructure timeline, the risk buffer, the source data, those were not the questions of an adversary. They were the questions of someone who understood exactly what she was proposing and wanted to make sure she understood it too. He had approved it in 4 minutes because he had already reviewed it for 6 weeks. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment with this realization, letting it settle. She had been fighting a battle that was not, in fact, a battle. She had been so prepared for opposition that she had not noticed the absence of it. She kept walking. The hotel was 6 blocks. She covered them at the pace of someone who was still thinking, which was slightly slower than her usual. A man on a bicycle went around her politely. A woman with a stroller went around her in the other direction. The city did what cities do, which is move regardless of what any individual in it is processing. By the time she reached the lobby, she had made a decision, or rather, the decision had made itself in the way decisions sometimes do when you stop arguing with them. She needed to understand who Ethan Mercer was. Not the financial profile, not the investor record, not the 3-layer holding structure, the person. Because in 4 minutes in a boardroom he had demonstrated a kind and quality of understanding that she had been building toward for years, and she had been sitting 2 seats away from him on a plane before any of that, and she had spent the entire flight making a calculation about him that had nothing to do with anything real. She pressed the elevator button. She thought about the turbulence, Lily's hand reaching out and finding hers. She thought about how she had held still. The elevator opened. She stepped in. On the 3rd floor, a man named Patrick from hotel management got in with a luggage cart, and she nodded at him, and the ride up was ordinary, and the floor she got off on was ordinary, and the hallway outside her room was ordinary. She set her bag down on the hotel desk. She sat in the chair. She looked at the wall. She had a habit, in moments of significant recalibration, of looking at neutral surfaces and letting her mind do its own organizing without interference. It had been a useful habit for 20 years. It was useful now. She looked at the wall and her mind did what it did, and after several minutes it landed in a place that was quiet and clear and slightly uncomfortable in the way that honest places usually are. She had been wrong about the plane. Not wrong in any way that mattered professionally. Nothing she had done on the plane had touched her work, and the work had been right, and it had been approved, and the Nairobi expansion was going to move forward, and she would spend the next 2 years executing it, and it would succeed. She knew it would succeed. That part was solid. But she had been wrong in the way that you are wrong when you look at a person and decide what they are worth, before you have asked anything about them at all. That kind of wrong does not come with a correction in a boardroom. It comes later, in a hotel room, in the quiet. She looked at the wall for a little while longer. Then she opened her laptop and sent the infrastructure document to Owen. Then she closed the laptop and ordered tea. Then she sat in the chair with the tea, and was quiet in a way she was not always quiet, a way that was not comfortable, and was not supposed to be. Outside, the city was going about the mid-afternoon part of its Tuesday, which was ordinary, which was fine, which was what cities did. 8 blocks away and 3 floors up, a little girl named Lily was probably drawing something in a notebook while a cheerful woman named Donna talked about birds. And somewhere in this building or moving through this city, Ethan Mercer was going about the business of being a person that Diana Ashford had once summed up in a glance, and a request for a different seat. She drank her tea. She sat with what she knew now. The story was not over. It was, in fact, just beginning to show her what it actually was. She did not expect to see him again. That was the truth she had arranged for herself by Wednesday morning. A clean, functional story in which the boardroom was the end of the thing, in which she went back to her city and her office and her life, and the Nairobi expansion moved forward through proper channels, and the incident on the plane was something that had happened and been processed, and would eventually shrink to the size of a lesson learned, rather than a wound open. She had nearly convinced herself of this by the time she came down for breakfast. Ethan was at a table near the window. He was alone. Lily was not with him. He had coffee and a newspaper that he was actually reading, which she had not expected. He had seemed, on the plane and in the boardroom, like someone whose thoughts were sufficient company. He was reading the kind of newspaper you read when you are at peace with the pace of the information, which is to say slowly and with attention. She could have gone to a different table. The restaurant was not full. There were 4 or 5 other tables available, each of them offering the clean, uncomplicated morning she had organized for herself. She walked to his table. She was not entirely sure why. She had not made a decision in the elevator, or in the lobby, or on the walk across the restaurant floor. She arrived at the table the way you sometimes arrive at a choice, without having gone through the usual steps. He looked up. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. She stood there for one beat, which was long enough for both of them to understand she was not simply walking past. "May I?" she asked. He set down the newspaper. He gestured to the chair across from him. She sat. A server came. She ordered coffee and toast. The server left. She and Ethan were on opposite sides of a small hotel table in the morning light, and neither of them spoke for a moment, and the moment was not as awkward as it should have been. That in itself told her something. He was not a man who used silence as a weapon. He simply lived in it comfortably, the way people live in houses they have made their own. She was not, by nature, a person who apologized. She had made a professional calculation of this years ago. That automatic apology was a habit that cost women in particular. That reflexive sorry was a debt you paid before anyone asked. That she would save her apologies for when she had actually done something wrong, and she would make them count. She had done something wrong. "I owe you an apology," she said. He looked at her in a way that was level and quiet, and entirely without the gratification she might have expected. The small satisfaction of someone who had been waiting for this, and was now receiving it. There was none of that. He was simply looking at her. "On the plane," she said. He did not say it was fine. He did not say he had forgotten. He did not reach for any of the comfortable, lubricating phrases that people reach for in these moments. He said, "I know what you're talking about. I behaved badly," she said. He picked up his coffee cup. He looked at it for a moment. "You were managing something," he said. "You weren't managing it well. There's a difference." She had not expected that. She had expected either the generosity that dismisses, "It's fine, really, don't worry," or the honesty that holds firm, "Yes, you did, and here is exactly how." She had not expected the precision of the middle thing, the distinction between behavior and being, said without judgment and without absolution. She looked at him for a moment. "That's a very even response," she said. "I've had 6 months of practice at not being reactive," he said, and something shifted in his face then. Barely. A movement so small that in any other light she might have missed it. You do it long enough. It starts to feel like a choice, instead of just survival. She did not ask. She knew better than to ask. Whatever 6 months meant, it was something that belonged to him, and it was something she could piece together from the quality of the tiredness she had noticed on the plane, the tiredness that had furniture in it, the tiredness that had moved in and stayed. The coffee arrived. She drank it. He returned to his newspaper for a moment and she thought the conversation might be over, but then he set the newspaper down again. "The Nairobi proposal," he said. "The infrastructure timeline adjustment. That was the right call. Thank you. I pushed back on the proposal for 6 weeks because I wanted to know if you would hold to it when it was challenged. Some people revise themselves out of good work when someone above them applies pressure." She looked at him. "You were testing it." "I was testing whether you understood your own reasons," he said. "Turns out you did." She sat with this for a moment. 6 weeks of revision requests, 3 rounds of pushback from Philip, the frustration she had taken home and worked through and come back with the same answer each time, more precisely argued than the time before, all of it, apparently, visible to a man she had never met. "You could have simply asked me," she said. "I would have answered." "You answered better without knowing I was asking," he said. She could not argue with that. It was true, and she knew it was true. She had done her best work because she believed someone was trying to dismantle it, and the effort of protecting it had sharpened it. This did not mean she was entirely comfortable with the method, but she was too honest to pretend the outcome had been worse for it. "How long were you planning to stay at a distance?" she asked. He thought about this. "I don't know," he said, and she believed him, because it was the kind of answer that only people who are genuinely uncertain give. People who are managing you give you the answer that closes the question. He left it open. The company was running well. Owen is good at what he does. I didn't need to be in the room until I needed to be in the room. And the Nairobi proposal was what brought you in. The Nairobi proposal was the reason, Lily was the other reason. He said this without explanation, and she did not ask for one, and he seemed to understand that she had understood it, because he moved on without elaborating. She looked out the window. The city was doing its Wednesday thing, people moving with purpose, traffic finding its rhythms, a dog on a leash conducting a very thorough investigation of a lamppost. She watched all of it without particular attachment. "She's extraordinary," Diana said. He looked up. "Your daughter," she said. "She said good morning to me on the plane, and when I didn't answer, she just turned back to the window. No dramatics, no second attempt. She decided it wasn't her problem and moved on." A pause. "I was 44 years old before I learned to do that." He was quiet for a moment. Something in his expression moved through the same set of rooms it had moved through in the turbulence, when Lily had grabbed her hand. Something complicated that arrived and departed before she could name it. "She's had some practice," he said, "at deciding what's hers and what isn't." She did not ask. She knew not to ask, but she understood it, in the way you understand something that has been said between the actual words. The breakfast arrived. Toast for her. He had already eaten, but the server brought a small bowl of fruit and set it on the table, and he ate from it without being particularly aware he was doing so, the way people eat when their mind is somewhere other than food. "The 2 adjustments Owen mentioned," she said, "for the risk mitigation section. He'll have them to you by end of day today. I'd like to understand the reasoning behind them before I revise." "That's a reasonable ask. Can I put time on your calendar before you leave the city?" He looked at her, and this time there was something in it that was not quite amusement, but was something adjacent. The look of someone who has just recognized a pattern in someone else that they were not expecting to like, but are finding interesting. "I'm here until Thursday," he said. "Owen can set it up." She nodded. She finished her coffee. She made a decision. "I want to say this clearly," she said, "because I don't think hedged apologies are worth much. The way I behaved on the plane was unkind. Not to you specifically. I didn't know you specifically. That's actually the point. I looked at you and your daughter, and I made a decision about what you were, and I acted on that decision, and I was wrong." He was looking at her steadily. "And I'm sorry," she said, clearly, without qualifications. He was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable quiet, thinking quiet. "I appreciate that," he said. And then, "Lily told me on Monday night that she thought you looked like someone who had forgotten how to be nice. And I said maybe, and she asked if I thought you'd remember." A pause. "I didn't know what to tell her." Diana looked at him. "What would you tell her now?" she asked. He considered it with the seriousness the question deserved. "I'd tell her I thought you were working on it," he said. She sat with that. It was not a compliment. It was not absolution. It was the specific, precise honesty of someone who had decided she was worth the truth. It was more than she had expected. She pushed her chair back. She picked up her bag. "I'll have Owen send a meeting request," she said. "Good," he said. She walked across the restaurant, and she did not look back, and he went back to his newspaper, and the morning continued being what mornings are, full of the ordinary things that turn out, later, to have been the hinge of everything. She had walked to his table because she owed him something real. She had walked away from it with something she had not expected. A beginning. Not a friendship, not a resolution, not the comfortable ending of a story that had been settled. A beginning, the particular feeling of 2 people who have looked at each other clearly for the first time and found the view complicated and interesting and worth returning to. She pressed the elevator button in the lobby. 2 floors up, Donna was probably already there, and Lily was probably already drawing something that would become part of a series in a small notebook, and Clover was probably sitting on the pillow like the queen she had been declared. The elevator opened. She stepped in. She thought about the question Lily had asked in a hotel room at midnight, relayed through a man she had only begun to see correctly. "Do you think she'll remember?" She thought, yes. She thought, I think that might be the point. The doors closed. She went up. Owen set up the meeting for 2 o'clock. It was in a small conference room on the 2nd floor of the Caldwell building, not the big boardroom, just a table with 4 chairs and a whiteboard on one wall, and a window that looked onto the inner courtyard where someone had planted a hedge that had gotten slightly out of control. She was there at 1:55. He arrived at 2 on the dot, Owen a step behind him with a folder, and the expression of a man who had learned to read a room before entering it, and had decided this room was acceptable. Owen set the folder on the table, said he would be just outside, and left with the efficiency of someone who had worked with Ethan long enough to know when he was needed and when he was a third wheel. Ethan sat down. Diana sat down. She had the proposal open on her laptop. He had the spiral notepad. They worked for 94 minutes. It was, she would think later, one of the most productive 94 minutes of her professional career. Not because the adjustments were complex, they were not, once the reasoning was clear, but because of how the work happened. He explained his thinking without performing it. He said when he was uncertain. He asked questions that she recognized, having thought about it now, as the same kind of questions she asked herself when she was testing her own logic, not hostile, not exploratory for the sake of it, but targeted. He wanted to know if the structure held. He trusted her to tell him if it didn't. She told him when it didn't, twice. Once for a timeline dependency she had not weighted correctly. Once for a personnel assumption she had made about the local team that he, with more regional experience than she had realized, could see was optimistic. She revised. He watched her revise without offering to help. He understood that she needed to do it herself. They finished. She closed the laptop. He closed the notepad. "That's a good proposal," he said. "It was a good proposal before," she said. "It was a correct proposal before," he said. "Now it's a good one." She looked at him across the small table in the conference room, with the overgrown hedge outside, and thought about the difference between correct and good, which was something she would think about for a long time afterward. Owen came back in. They wrapped the administrative details. Owen would coordinate with Philip. The board approval would be formalized by end of week. The Nairobi team would be briefed by the following Monday. Done. Ethan stood up. He picked up the notepad. He was about to thank her, the professional way, the meeting-ending way, and she knew it because she had heard 1,000 meeting-ending thank yous in her life and could recognize the inhale that preceded them. "There's something I want to ask you," she said. He waited. "When you were reviewing the proposal, the 6 weeks, when you were pushing back, were you ever going to let it fail, or was it always going to be approved if I held my position?" He considered this with the seriousness she was learning to expect from him. "I was prepared to let it fail," he said, "if you had revised it in ways that weakened it to satisfy the pushback, or if you had been unable to explain the data when pressed." He paused. "But I had read everything you'd written. I thought you knew your own work. I was more than 70% certain you'd hold." 70%, she said. "The other 30% was the possibility that I was wrong about what I had read," he said. "I'm not in the habit of assuming my read on a person is complete." She looked at him. "That is a very careful way to live," she said. "It is," he said simply, not as criticism of itself, not as pride, simply as a fact about himself that he had already made his peace with. She stood. She picked up her bag. She put out her hand. He shook it. His handshake was what she expected. Firm, unhurried, not making any kind of point. "The next Nairobi review will be in Q2, she said. "I'd like you in the room for that one too." He looked at her. "I'll be there," he said. Owen held the conference room door. She walked out. She took the stairs instead of the elevator, because she needed the 3 floors of movement, the rhythm of descent, the ordinary physical fact of one foot and then the other. She had the particular feeling of someone who has had a conversation that mattered, who has said the true things and had the true things said back, and who is still absorbing what that costs and what it gives. It costs the version of yourself that was easier to maintain. It gives something harder to name. She pushed out into the lobby. Frank was at the desk. He looked up. "Good meeting?" he asked, because Frank had worked that lobby long enough to read departures. "Yes," she said, and meant it precisely, and without qualification. "Good," said Frank. He went back to his computer. She walked out into the afternoon. She flew home Thursday morning. Her own flight, different airline, no seat drama. She sat in 4C, which was a window seat, and she looked out at the city getting smaller below her, and she thought about what the week had been. She had arrived with a presentation and a profile of an adversary who turned out to be something else entirely. She had sat on a plane next to a man she had decided was not worth her attention and had spent 6 weeks preparing to fight him, and had found, in the room, that fighting was not what was required. She had apologized in a hotel restaurant over coffee and toast, and he had received it without theater. She had worked across a table with him for 94 minutes and revised her best work into something better. She had shaken his hand. She was not sure what to call what had happened, which was itself a kind of answer. The things that change you rarely arrive with labels. They arrive as mornings and restaurant tables and small hands in turbulence, and the particular quality of a quiet that is not hostile but simply alive. The plane climbed. The city disappeared behind cloud. She opened her laptop and began drafting the memo to the Nairobi team. She wrote quickly. The words came in complete sentences, as they always did. She was not thinking about Ethan Mercer. She was thinking about the work. But she had left a space in herself, somewhere behind the work, that had not been there before Tuesday, a space that was slightly larger than a version of her that had once called a flight attendant to request a different seat, a space that was shaped, more or less, like the acknowledgement that you can be very good at many things and still not have seen enough of what a person might be carrying to decide their value in one glance. That space would stay. She would work around it. She would build things in it. She would not explain it to anyone, because the things that change you are usually between you and the morning they happened in. The clouds went white and thick below the plane. She typed. The cursor moved. The work went on. 3 weeks passed. The Caldwell Group Nairobi expansion moved through its formal approval process with the speed of something that has already been decided, which it had. Diana coordinated with the legal team, with the regional contact she had cultivated for 8 months in anticipation of this moment, and with Owen, who turned out to be a considerably more useful partner once the distance of the holding structure had been removed, and he was allowed to function as what he actually was, a direct line to the person who owned the majority of the decisions. She did not hear from Ethan directly. She had not expected to. Their working relationship was channeled, still, through Owen, and she found this neither strange nor disappointing. He had told her he would be in the room for the Q2 review, and she believed him. There was no reason to manufacture a reason for contact before then. She was in her office on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks to the day from the boardroom meeting, when her assistant knocked and said there was a package at the front desk. Her name was on it in handwriting she did not recognize at first. Not business handwriting, not Owen's precise, efficient script, something loopier, slower, the handwriting of someone who was still learning how the letters were supposed to go. She carried it to her desk. She opened it. Inside was a stuffed rabbit, gray, soft, round-bodied. Both of its eyes were present and intact, small brown buttons perfectly symmetrical. Around its neck someone had tied a thin piece of yellow ribbon, loosely, the way you tie a ribbon when you are 7 years old and doing your very best. There was a note. The paper was folded once. She opened it. The writing was in pencil, large and careful, the letters slightly different sizes, the way children's writing is when they are concentrating. It said, "This one has all its parts." That was all. She sat down. She held the rabbit in both hands and looked at it for a while. She had not thought she would be moved by this. She was not, in general, a person who was easily moved by things. She had organized that about herself over many years of working in rooms where feeling things openly was not particularly useful, and the organization had been effective. She knew where her feelings were. She kept them where they belonged. This moved her anyway. Not the rabbit exactly. Not even the note. Though the note did something to her that she was not going to examine too closely right now. What moved her was the fact of Lily, a 7-year-old who had fallen asleep with her feet in a stranger's seat, and grabbed a stranger's hand in the dark, and woken up and simply gone back to sleep, who had looked at Diana on a plane and said hi, and then, when no answer came, decided it was not her problem and turned back to the window, who had looked at a woman who had not been kind and had not concluded that the woman was the kind of person who could not be kind, but had instead looked for the reason, who had sent her a rabbit with all its parts, because something in her had decided that Diana deserved something whole. She set the rabbit on her desk. Not in a drawer, not in a bag to take home, on her desk, next to the monitor on her left side, facing out, so that it would be in her peripheral vision when she was working, and so that anyone who came to her office for a meeting would see it, and she would not feel the need to explain it, because it did not require explanation. It required only that she leave it where she could see it. She called Owen. He picked up on the first ring, which was what Owen did. "The package," she said. "Yes," Owen said. Was this Ethan's idea, or Lily's? A pause, not a hesitation. Owen did not hesitate, but a small, deliberate collection of words before he released them. Lily asked, he said. He thought it was a good idea. She looked at the rabbit. Please thank them both, she said. I will, Owen said. She hung up. She looked at the rabbit for another moment, and then she turned back to her screen, and she opened the Nairobi coordination thread, and she worked. The rabbit sat on the left side of her desk for the next 3 years. She moved offices twice in that time, once to a larger space on a higher floor, once to the new building when Caldwell Group expanded its headquarters, and both times she moved the rabbit first, before the files, before the laptop, before the nameplate. The movers thought it was funny. She did not explain. In those 3 years, she and Ethan Mercer built a working relationship that was precise and unusual and extremely effective. He came to 2 more quarterly meetings in person. The third one he attended by video call because Lily had a school performance that he was not going to miss. Diana had asked Owen about the performance afterward. She was told it involved a play about a lost dog that had found its way home, and that Lily had been the dog, and that she had been very good at it. She had asked, "What's her name?" Owen had said, "Lily." She had said, "I know. I mean, what's her name in the play?" Owen had paused and said he would find out, and came back 10 minutes later to say, "Maple." She did not know why she asked. She did not know why she needed the name. She stored it anyway, the way you store the things that matter, without being able to articulate why they matter. The Nairobi expansion delivered its 18-month target in 17 months and 2 weeks. Diana sent Ethan the final numbers in a brief email. He replied in 3 sentences, which was 2 more than usual. The last sentence said, "Well done." She read it 3 times and then archived the email, but she read it 3 times first. She saw him twice outside of work contexts in those 3 years. Once at a conference where they were both speakers on different panels, and they had coffee in the hallway between sessions and talked for 20 minutes about a piece of market research she had not yet published, and she discovered that he had been following similar threads in a completely different industry and had arrived at 3 of her 4 conclusions by a different route, and she found this not threatening but genuinely interesting in the way that good conversation is genuinely interesting. The second time was at the airport. Not the same airport, a different city, a different gate, but the same peculiar mathematics of coincidence that had started all of this. She was waiting for a delayed flight. He came through the gate from an arriving one. He had Lily with him. Lily was 10 now, and had a new notebook, and was sketching something with the focused speed of a person who has gotten better at a thing they were always going to be good at. He saw Diana first. She saw him see her. Then Lily looked up. 3 years had changed Lily in the ways 3 years change children. Taller, a different quality of stillness in her face, something that had moved from the charming disorder of a 7-year-old toward something more self-aware, more considered. But her eyes were the same eyes, and she saw Diana, and she registered who Diana was, the recognition clear and uncomplicated, and she did the same thing she had done on the plane at the very beginning. She said hi. "Hi, Lily," Diana said. Lily looked at her for a moment, with the serious, evaluating look she had probably been doing since she was very small, and that she had never, apparently, lost. "Did you like the rabbit?" she asked. Diana felt something move in her chest that she did not have precise words for. "Very much," she said. "He sits on my desk." Lily considered this. "Her," she said. "I'm sorry?" "The rabbit is a her," Lily said. "Like Clover." A pause. "I thought it might be nicer to have the kind with all the parts." Diana looked at this 10-year-old who had been 7 on a plane, who had grabbed her hand in the dark and let go without making it a thing, who had looked at a woman who had not been kind and decided the woman might still be the kind of person who could use something whole. "It was nicer," Diana said, "considerably." Lily nodded. She appeared satisfied. She went back to her notebook. Ethan was looking at her, and she was looking at him, and between them was the full sum of everything: the plane, the boardroom, the restaurant breakfast, the 94-minute working session, the 3 years of precise and unusual collaboration, and neither of them said any of it, because all of it was already there without being said. "Safe flight," he said. "You too," she said. He moved through the gate. Lily walked beside him, still sketching, the notebook held open in one hand while she walked, which was impressive coordination. Diana watched them until they went around the corner. She sat back down at her gate. Her flight was still delayed. She had 40 minutes. She looked at her phone. She put her phone away. She looked at the gate across from hers, where a woman was helping a small child with a jacket zipper, both of them concentrating on the same small task. She thought about the first time she had sat in seat 3C, the way she had stood and waited for a different seat and not gotten one, and sat down with her jaw set and her laptop out, determined to manage the inconvenience of the man and his child by putting everything she could between herself and them. She thought about what she had not seen. She thought about what she had missed. And then she thought, because she was Diana Ashford, and she was good at this, and she had been doing it in every city and every boardroom and every version of every morning for a long time, she thought about what she had learned. It was a short list, but it was heavy. She did not always know what someone was carrying. She did not always know what it cost a person to be in the seat next to her. She did not always know what was happening 2 inches behind the silence of the person she had decided to keep distance from. She could choose not to know, or she could choose to leave a little room. She had been leaving a little room for 3 years. It had made the work better. It had made the mornings more interesting. It had put a rabbit on her desk that she moved first when she changed offices. It had, in the specific way that the most important things happen, made her more of what she had always wanted to be, and less of what she had been easy to become. Her flight was called. She stood. She gathered her bag. She walked toward the gate. The rabbit was at home now. She had moved it from the office to her apartment 6 months ago, when she had reorganized the desk and found that she wanted it in a place where she would see it in the morning before work, rather than in the middle of the day when she was already in motion. It sat on the windowsill in her kitchen, next to the coffee maker, where the morning came in. It was the first thing she saw when she woke up early, when the light was still gray, and the city was still deciding what kind of day it was going to be, and she was standing in the kitchen in her socks waiting for the coffee to brew, and the small stuffed rabbit was sitting in the window with both of its eyes. Every morning she saw it. Every morning it said the same thing. This one has all its parts. She walked through the gate. She found her seat. She sat down. She put her bag under the seat in front of her, and buckled her belt and looked out the window at the tarmac, which was gray and flat and ordinary, and at the sky beyond it, which was the kind of pale that meant the morning was not done arriving. The plane began to move. She looked out the window. She let the morning come. There are people who move through the world like water, finding the fastest path, wearing down whatever resists them, arriving at the lowest point by the most efficient route. Diana had always been one of them. She had taken a kind of pride in it, in the clean speed of her thinking, in her ability to read a room, to move resources, to build arguments that held under pressure. She had built a career on the quality of her motion. What she had not built, until the plane and the boardroom and the breakfast table and the 94-minute working session and one small stuffed rabbit, was the capacity to stop and look. Not at a spreadsheet, not at a market, not at a risk assessment or a personnel file or a quarterly projection. At a person. At the particular and irreducible fact of a person sitting in the next seat, carrying something she had not thought to ask about, doing his quiet best. It was a skill she had not known she was missing. Skills you do not know you are missing tend to be the most expensive ones. They cost you things you cannot itemize because you do not know they are gone. She had been paying that cost for years. She was not paying it anymore. That was not a simple thing. It was not a dramatic thing. It did not happen in a moment of revelation or a scene with appropriate music. It happened the way actual change happens. In hotel breakfasts and conference rooms and 20-minute conversations in airport hallways, and in the daily practice of looking at the thing on your windowsill that reminds you who you are choosing to be. She had chosen. She kept choosing. That was the whole story. The plane leveled off at altitude. The seatbelt sign went off. Around her, people shifted, opened laptops, reached for headphones, settled into the particular interior world of a flight. She watched them for a moment, all of them private, all of them in transit, all of them carrying whatever they were carrying in the quiet and the altitude and the thin pressed air. She thought about Ethan in his gray jacket, reading a newspaper at the hotel breakfast table, and being, in that moment, simply a person having a morning, not the majority stakeholder. Not the man who had approved 6 weeks of work in 4 minutes. Not the person she had tried to remove herself from on a flight. Just a man at a table, in the ordinary early light, being present in the way that some people manage to be present, and others spend years learning. She thought about Lily at 10, walking through a gate with a notebook open, sketching while in motion, the kind of casual competence at a beloved thing that comes from having done it every day without overthinking it, not performing it, just doing it, because it was what she did. She thought about Clover, one-eyed, tucked under a 7-year-old's arm, the original rabbit, the one that had watched everything from the beginning, missing its right eye and still perfectly useful, still doing everything a rabbit is supposed to do. She thought, we are all missing something. The functional ones just do not stop functioning. Outside the window, the sky was its usual impossible blue above the cloud level, the kind of blue that made no promises and required nothing and simply was. She opened her laptop. She worked. She had a meeting at 9 tomorrow morning, and a call with the Nairobi regional director at noon, and in 6 weeks, there was a board presentation she was already building in her head, and the Q2 review was coming, and Ethan had said he would be there, and she was going to have something worth showing him. She always had something worth showing. The difference was that now she was also learning to notice, in the spaces between the work, the things that could not be measured, the things that did not go in reports, the weight a person carried and never mentioned, the quality of a silence, the way a child on a plane said hello to a stranger, without any expectation that the stranger would deserve it. The plane went on through the blue. She worked. And on the windowsill of her kitchen, back in the apartment, the morning light was already moving across the small rabbit on its perch, catching the brown buttons of its eyes, turning the gray of its fur the particular warm color that gray things become when the sun finds them. Both eyes open, all its parts present, waiting as it always waited for the morning to begin. She landed 2 hours later. The airport was busy in the way that airports are always busy, full of people going towards something or away from something, the math of departure and arrival happening simultaneously in every direction. She went through the terminal with the practiced ease of someone who had done this hundreds of times, past the gates, past the shops with their bright unnecessary things, through the short corridor that connected the terminal to the parking structure. She had left her car there for 6 days. She put her bag in the trunk. She got in. She sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel and the engine not yet running, which was a thing she had been doing more lately, sitting still for a moment before the next motion, in the way that Ethan sat still without it meaning anything was wrong. She thought about the first time she had seen him, crouching on an airport floor at gate C14, trying to get a shoe back on a child who had decided the shoe was the enemy. She had walked past without looking. She had been managing her boarding time, which was a thing she was always managing. She had not looked. She was looking now, not at him, at the space the memory occupied, at the version of herself who had moved through that terminal with the clean, efficient certainty of someone who had already decided, somewhere below conscious thought, what was worth her attention and what was not. That version of herself had been competent. That version had been accomplished and fast-thinking and capable of building things that worked. She did not disown her, but she was something else now, something additionally, something that had room in it for the tired man with the cracker crumbs and the stuffed rabbit and the things he was carrying that she had not known to ask about. She started the car. She drove home through the city she had lived in for 11 years, past the coffee shop where she went on Sunday mornings, past the dry cleaner she had been meaning to visit for 2 weeks, past the small park where, in the spring, people sat on blankets and did the slow, comfortable things that people do when the weather permits. She parked outside her building. She took the elevator up. She unlocked her door. She went to the kitchen. She turned on the coffee maker. And while it worked, she looked at the small gray rabbit on the windowsill, sitting in the early evening light that was not quite the same as morning light, but was its own kind of honest. She looked at its 2 brown eyes. She looked at the yellow ribbon around its neck that had been tied by a 10-year-old's hands. This one has all its parts. She poured her coffee. She sat down. She was home.